I came home from a 2-day trip and found a gate across my driveway, an iron thing with a fresh padlock and a sign that called my land private community property. Keys in my hand, I looked at it like the world had briefly learned to prank me, and then I realized it wasn't a joke. I was locked out of my own place, plain as that, and for a second I laughed because what else do you do when life decides to get strange? My name is Wade Callahan. I'm 45. I retired from the fire department 3 years back after my knee started reminding me I wasn't invincible anymore. I took what I had bought, a stretch of Texas dirt, out past a little town called Briar Ridge Modest House, a barn that smells like hay and old tools, peach trees I planted with my own hands, and a dog named Scout who thinks every porch is his throne. I liked the quiet. Morning coffee on the porch. Scout at my boots whine moving through the grass. It was the slow kind of peace you pay for with sweat, not money. Then the developers arrived. They bought land on my eastern edge, and like a rumor it spread fast. Stone entry identical mailboxes, landscaping that looked like a catalog. They named it Cedar Hollow Estates, and they brought with them an HOA with stationery and opinions. My deed was clean, no HOA, no covenants. I checked that box before I signed anything. But apparently stationery and opinions sometimes move faster than deeds. At first it was the letters, thin envelopes politely worded. Your barn color is not consistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. Please remove agricultural equipment from visible sightlines. I tossed the first few in the trash because why give paper the satisfaction of being read? Then a man in pressed khakis and loafers showed up at my gate, smelling of office air and cologne. Martin Huxley, he said, president of Cedar Hollow HOA, as if that title carried a badge. He smiled in the way people smile when they think they're delivering mercy. We're just trying to maintain property values, Mr. Callahan, he said, as if property values were fragile flowers to be policed. I told him I built a ranch, not a showroom, and he said curtly that cooperation would be appreciated. That smile never reached his eyes, and I could see the part that mattered, the control right under it. A few weeks later, I found survey flags along my eastern boundary. I went to the county clerk Harold, and he pulled up filings. Turns out Cedar Hollow had bought a skinny strip of land that ran right up to my access road. Not enough to put a house on, but enough to be obnoxious. It felt like a surgical move, a hand sliding in where it could strangle. They didn't cross my fence. They wrapped theirs around mine. 2 weeks after that, I drove to Houston to help my mom after minor surgery. We ate bad takeout and watched old westerns, and I left early Sunday so I could be back before sunset. When my truck hit the gravel driveway and I saw the new steel fence and the iron gate sitting square on that thin strip, all the jokes disappeared. It was deliberate, clean, expensive, a noose with a padlock on it. I stood in the dust keys in my pocket and felt a calm I didn't recognize. Fighting fires teaches you something useful. Panic is a poor tool. Planning is the one that saves houses. They wanted me to blow up, holler, call lawyers, make a scene. Instead, I drove into town and called a friend, Luis Moreno, who knows real estate like some folks know football stats. I owed him a favor from the barn fire a few years back. I told him to dig up the chain of title for that skinny strip. 2 days later, Luis calls, voice a little breathless in that way people get when a plot takes a turn. The guy who sold Cedar Hollow that strip still owned another piece, a tiny odd-shaped parcel that ran behind the first and tapped back to the county road. An afterthought. A scrap of paper on a map. I wired the money that afternoon. 3 days later, the county clerk recorded me as owner of the only ground that connected their gate to the public road. Funny thing about odds, sometimes the seam in a blanket is as useful as a seamstress's needle. The utility shed Cedar Hollow had placed behind their gate, the one with their maintenance equipment, sat on my new strip. The only brass key to their lock hung on a hook in that shed. I walked in, took the key, held it between my fingers like a quiet little victory, and drove through their gate onto my own land. No yelling, no drama. The best moves are often patient. If you'd asked me then whether that would end it, I would have said yes, naive and optimistic in the best possible way. It didn't end. They escalated. First came the essayed courtesy. A polite woman named Rebecca Sloan, legal counsel, arrived with a leather portfolio and a smile that was all calculation. We have submitted a petition to reclassify your property as a managed natural buffer zone, she told me. Reclassify, make your land fall under our governance. Because if you can't own someone, you can always try to legislate them out. My cousin Caleb Landew's attorney, cool as a soaked towel, put them on notice. He spoke on speakerphone like a judge at a rodeo, crisp and certain. "You have 3 seconds to step off my client's property," he said, "or we file criminal trespass." Rebecca tried statute and title and the law's polite loopholes. Caleb quoted codes back until she ran out of sentences. That night, under a sky as dark as scouting report, someone on their side of the fence dug a trench, a makeshift access, and a drone of equipment hummed. Then a metallic click and a bang. My drone spiraled to dirt and smoke. 3 nights later, masked men slipped into my barn with a red fuel can and a lighter, and I called 911 before they got to the spark. Sheriff Tom Briggs watched the footage with his jaw set like old iron. "They're trying to scare you into selling," he said. "Make it not worth the fight." He didn't have to finish the sentence. People understood what that meant. A foreclosure notice landed in the mail a week later. $18,000 in community assessments for violations I never heard of until they appeared in black and white shadow encroachment. Unapproved livestock units, even reflective roofing. Reflective roofing. My barn's roof glints in the sun. Apparently that was a crime now. Caleb filed motions. A judge put a freeze on financial action. Then my power line got cleanly sliced at the county pole professional quick. I sat on my porch with Scout at my feet and a shotgun across my lap. And somewhere between exhaustion and anger, an idea settled in my head. If they were willing to forge, intimidate, and maybe burn, then they weren't protecting a neighborhood. They were trying to create leverage. Leverage sits on value. So I drove out to see Earl Whitaker, 80, a rancher whose knees creak and whose mind is sharp like barbed wire. We drank sweet tea on his porch while he told stories about land and patience and deals done with handshakes. I asked him if he'd sold them everything. He laughed slow and said, "Not quite. Turns out developers sometimes get excited and miss the seams, tiny access easements, and odd-shaped strips that nobody notices until they need them." Earl had kept a few. He sold the main parcel but held back slivers almost as if he suspected greed would have to step on them someday. One of those slivers ran right under Cedar Hollow's front office, the shiny glass and the parking lot and all their curated charm. That was the twist they never saw coming. I bought that sliver 6 feet wide in spots 10 and others legally described and recorded and undeniable. I didn't chain the door, didn't call the TV trucks, didn't plant a flag and dance on their lobby table. I waited. The day before our hearing, I nailed an official notice to their front door. "You are operating a commercial office on private property owned by Wade Callahan. Cease operations immediately." Tipped my hat to the camera and walked back to the truck. By noon, the local reporter, Dana Mitchell, had the story live on the feed. The internet did the rest. Cedar Hollow's polished facade started to look to other folks like a flimsy costume. In court with Caleb calm and steady, we walked the judge through every move the fence built to isolate the unauthorized road, the forged permits, the fake violations, the arson attempt. We handed the clerk a flash drive containing internal communications emails and notes that read like a playbook to squeeze me out. Silence in that courtroom felt big. Rebecca Sloan shifted and said she'd been unaware of the full scope of the board's plans, and Judge Ella Porter looked at Martin like the scales were suddenly real and heavy. Motions were dismissed. The liens evaporated. The attempted reclassification was denied. The judge referred the matter to the district attorney for investigation into fraud, conspiracy, and arson. 2 hours later, deputies walked into their glass office and walked out with Martin and 2 board members in cuffs. Residents from their subdivision lined the sidewalks and watched. You might think I danced on my porch that night. I didn't. I stood at my gate with Scout, who wagged like nothing fundamental in the world had broken. Something settled inside me, not joy exactly, more like a long breath after sprinting. Justice in that quiet felt small and real. Then came the decision that surprised more people than me. I could have sold that sliver back, priced it like a toll booth, and walked away. Plenty told me to cash out, move somewhere quieter, buy a lake house, and forget the dust. But this was never about money. It was about space, about who gets to decide what belongs in a place. So I built an arena. Wooden posts, metal roof, bleachers for a few hundred. Not a fortress, not a provocation. A community pavilion where we hosted weekend rodeos, live music, veteran cookouts, youth horse events. On the first Saturday, people filled folding chairs on my land. Kids ran in the dirt. Someone burned burgers. The music wasn't loud enough to make anyone angry, only loud enough to make the night feel real. Curtains twitched in those tidy beige houses across the way. Folks came to the gate hesitant at first, then smiling, then staying. A month later, I got a letter from a new board president, a woman named Leah Grant, apologizing for the previous leadership and asking to find common ground. Here's what I learned, and it's small and a little sad. They weren't cartoon villains. They were people who believed order meant control, that uniformity meant safety, that anything outside their curated bubble was a threat. Me, I wasn't blameless. I could have smiled and taken the first note as polite advice and found a little compromise. But once you let this kind of conflict harden, it gets set like old concrete. Redrawing lines becomes harder than laying new ones. Now, on summer evenings, you can hear clapping drift over the field from my side and the soft hum of sprinklers from theirs. Sometimes a neighbor wanders over for a burger, then 2, then 3 times a month. People like music and community more than instructions. They like horses and kids and not being told what their porch should look like. So here's where I leave you with something to chew on. Was I right to push back the way I did, to buy that sliver, to let the court see what was happening, to build something that reminded them they didn't own the sky? Or should I have taken the high road? Sold the strip, chosen tranquility over principle? Where is the line between protecting your home and becoming the fight yourself? Would you have stood your ground or walked away? Tell me what you think. Was I stubborn, brave, foolish, or all three? If you've ever been boxed in by people who decided they knew what's best for your life, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes freedom isn't a headline or a firework. Sometimes it's steady, patient, and stubborn as a fence post until the dust finally settles.